What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Tribe of Runners. I'm your host, Liz Myers, and today we are doing another podcast on a crazy topic, and we've decided to name these series the Philosophy Hour. Of course, with Kilian, Korth, and Christie, Brinker. I have the best co-hosts on to confuse me, to make me think all about life, and just to dive into things that I never really thought I would think about. So thank you guys both so much for being on the podcast, and I'm super excited to dive into all things. Before we get to the topic, though, Kilian had a really great intro into getting back into philosophy and talking about things. So, Kilian, I'll let you kind of take it away, and then we'll dive into the actual topic of the podcast.
Thanks, Liz. Always good to be here with you both. I always picture the Welcome to Philosophy Hour as sort of like that smooth jazz, like welcome back to Philosophy Hour with Liz, Christie, and Kilian. But yeah, I was thinking we could kick off by kind of connecting why these conversations, or if and how these conversations can affect our practical everyday lives. And so last time we talked about free will. If you haven't already, people should go back and listen to that episode because we'll probably reference it, and it connects to the topic at hand, which is like universal consciousness and or panpsychism, if you prefer. But before we get to that, I think I was curious for you two, because I have an answer for myself personally. Has the free will discussion and the disbelief in its existence, has that affected your life in any way, positive, negative, or if it hasn't, I mean, that's an answer too. I'm just curious.
Go ahead, Chrissy.
Yeah, I'd say the number one takeaway that I have from that I do every single day is I've shifted my mindset of being like more grateful. Like anytime something happens, I just think like, instead of thinking like, I'm so glad this happened or whatever, I'm like, no, I'm grateful that this happened. So that's been one big shift. I definitely do think about it like, maybe not every day, but every once in a while, I'll just like kind of sit back and just start thinking about, not having free will as a whole and like how that plays out in my life. But the gratefulness has been like the biggest thing. And I absolutely love that. Like, I think that mindset is so good for pretty much everything.
Nice.
Yeah, I can agree. It has consumed my life, but not in like a bad way. But I'm like rethinking everything. And a lot of times, kind of like Chrissy said, in the sense of like, I will just like go in this random like tangent, if you will, and just really think about something probably a little bit too deep. But I kind of mentioned this to Kilian earlier before the podcast, is like, I notice it a lot in other people. And that maybe sound very judgmental, but I'm not meaning it to be, but it has made me realize that like people genuinely probably just don't know. And I don't know anything. I said this to Kilian. I don't know anything. I'm not claiming to know something, but you really realize like we're just out here trying to do our best, and what we think is our best may not look like that to someone else. And or like just realizing people may not realize what they're doing, and they think they know what they're doing. And I'm like, like, I don't know. It's just such a thing that I cannot stop thinking about. So I have, been just in the weeds with it, but not where it's consumed my life in a negative way. It's just like I really take a lot more time to think about a lot of things. So thank you, Kilian, for making me do that. What about
Nice.
you, though?
That's awesome. The gratitude piece for me practically has been a big one. And then over the course of years, the primary effect that I felt is just this massive sense of empathy toward all the various flavors of human misbehavior, ranging from the small to the really significant. So I'll say something rather extreme here. Like, I can get myself into a mindset where I could be empathetic to like the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, where like what we think of as human evil, I think is just the human machine equivalent of a car with its brake lines cut going down a hill. Like, I just don't think that we've got the level of agency that we tend to think of in our lives. And so it's like, if you were Jeffrey Dahmer, just you can just like input various levels of human misbehavior there. Like, if you're that person, like, you have their brain, you have their neurons, their synapses, all of their experiences. It's like, you're just going to be that person. And I think you can take that down to much less awful manifestations of what we would think of as evil. The person that cuts you off in traffic, the the, you know, other person that parks their shopping cart covering the aisle. It's like these little things are also a part of that spectrum. And I think the disbelief in free will makes me more patient with just all of those various types of problems that we encounter day to day. And that has been a big positive effect for me, because I think there was a point in my life where I would have been extremely judgmental about a lot of those things, ranging from big to small. And it's that has made me much more charitable towards other people.
Yeah, truly makes sense. And it is something, I've never thought I would really think so much about, to be 100% honest with you. And now, like, listening to this, we all listened to Lights On by Annika Harris about consciousness. And now, like, I have another thing that I keep thinking about, and it all does kind of tie together. And you kind of mentioned that, like,
yeah,
all of this stuff, kind of has this like underlining line, and a lot of it is we just don't know. And I think that's what has me so hooked. What about you guys? Like, is it that weird, like, we don't know, but we think we know, and then we hear something, you're like, oh, but that kind of makes sense too? Does that get you guys?
Yeah, definitely. I think like the mystery is extremely compelling. I think there's some level of beauty to the not knowing, just like there's some level of beauty to just letting, a practical question that could be answered by a quick Google kind of go off into the ether, as opposed to immediately answering it for yourself. So I do think there's something really attractive about living with the big unknown. And as I've gotten older, I've just realized that the cliche, the more you know, the less you know, is just so baseline level true. Like we can learn, and I'm sure we'll talk about, we'll probably slightly get into some quantum mechanical stuff on this podcast that we can hopefully translate to people in reasonably understandable ways. But you can know about the two slit experiment with lights and particles and how they can behave as two things at once. And then that just opens up this realm of like, okay, so if our perspective is shifting the way elementary particles behave, like, what does that mean? So you actually like learn a fact, and that fact delivers to you the capacity to have 50 more questions. And I think that process is really, really pretty great.
Something I'll say about that is that when Liz and I, we were kind of talking back and forth after we started listening to this audiobook, and I couldn't listen to it while I ran. Like, I had to be in a setting where I could really focus on what I was doing. Like, we love to multitask, and science says that we're actually really bad at multitasking. So I had to like really listen to this, just because, not that the science was so deep on it, but there were a lot of times where I wanted to listen to part of it, and then I just wanted to set back, and kind of like that exact scenario with like, when you like, are we like actually seeing, like, is this reality? Like, just having all those questions. And I didn't like get actually any answers to anything for the most part.
Yeah.
I just have more questions about life, and like I'll go outside and I'll look at a tree and I'll be like, does this tree exist? So now I'm just like confused if anything is real. Thanks.
That's the best. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that really baffles me with the consciousness topic is just the brute fact that we are not living in the present moment. Like, we have no access to whatever the present might be, just because we are receiving light signals and sound vibrations, and our brain is taking those and translating them to us as if they're arriving at the same time. And we know for a fact that the light is arriving beforehand. And so we're living, it's milliseconds, but we're living behind the actual present moment. And our brain is taking like all of this non-synchronous information and synchronizing it to us in an understandable way. And there was a while after listening to Lights On for the first time where that fact alone, I would just look at the world and I was like, what is going on? Like, how does all of this information just get to me in a way that I can actually navigate it? Like, kudos to whatever's happening in the brain to make it possible.
Yeah, it's actually like made it to where I don't believe anything's real. Like even like going outside and like looking at the tree, and I'm like, does this tree only exist because I've looked at it now? And then I'm like, okay, so I also see that the leaves are green, but like now I know that my brain is perceiving that it's green, but it might not actually be green. I don't know. Like, I just like curled up in a ball and like cried in the corner.
There's times in this where we're just gonna sound like college students who have just gotten high for the first time.
I was literally thinking that right now. Like, could you imagine jumping into this conversation right now and hearing like, I was just looking at a tree and wondering if it was really there or not. Like,
The
we sound
listeners are
insane.
like, the listeners are like, Christie's just outside staring at trees all day, and she must have like tripped shrooms before she went out there, and
Yeah.
that's the only way this makes sense. But no, I'm like trying to like perceive this, and it is like I just brought up shrooms, but it is funny because like that actually has like a really interesting tie-in to all this too about psychedelics and
100%.
how maybe it unlocks a portion of your mind. But I do kind of feel like maybe we should explain like consciousness, like kind of like what we're actually like talking about,
Yeah.
and what is the question that that Lights On was really trying to answer.
Yeah, so if you wanna let me just kind of go over the basic competing theories of consciousness, I'll do my best to explain those. So it's pretty much the most consequential mystery that faces modern science is how consciousness arises. And there's essentially two theories. One is called information complexity theory, and that is as you make a structure more complex by adding more and more atoms and different arrangements, eventually that structure reaches a complexity where consciousness arrives along for the ride. There's probably someone out there with more knowledge than me who's going to quibble with that, because I do feel as if sometimes I describe that in a way that makes it sound less plausible than maybe it is, because it's not the theory that I subscribe to. But basically, you add more building blocks in more and more complex arrangements, consciousness eventually pops in. The second theory is that consciousness is actually a fundamental building block of matter. So just to get the weird part out of the way, this is essentially the claim that up quarks, down quarks, electrons, elementary particles would have some level of consciousness pertaining to them. Not necessarily a consciousness that you or I could relate to in any way, but a consciousness that when stacked upon itself is going to add up to something like human level consciousness, bat level consciousness, trees, monkeys, whatever. And so if you take that at face value, you just have to be like, okay, the table my laptop is sitting on has some level of experience happening to it. The stones I walk across, the asphalt I drive across, the air itself. And that to me, I'll just lay my cards on the table, actually seems like the more parsimonious theory, in that it seems more magical that you just start like stacking Legos and then at some point, boom, consciousness arrives, as opposed to you start stacking Legos of consciousness and then you create something like us who are having what we feel like is a very complex and deep experience. And so those are kind of the two competing theories. And also to just say up front, like nobody knows. There's evidence for both of these things in theory, but it's not even as if like you could look at just like bare facts and be like, this one has 52% and this one has 48% of the facts on their side. It's more like, okay, where does your intuition lead you at some point? And then there's also the unfortunate fact that I'm sure all of us at some point got to a point in Lights On where there was some physicist talking and we just heard them say, well, you're just going to have to trust the math. And then once you get to the, you're just going to have to trust the math phase of this discussion, I throw my hands in the air and I'm like, okay, cool. Like, that works for me. But yeah, that's kind of the broad outlook of what we're talking about. And so you can call the second theory of consciousness either universal consciousness, which is what I prefer, or it is also called panpsychism in the literature, which I think sounds a little too Sedona for me, for my liking. But you know, what do you, are those descriptions sound about right to you guys?
Yeah, for me, 100%. And in the Lights On, they do push more for fundamental or like the universal consciousness, right?
Yeah, she ends up probably saying like I think she ends up somewhere around like the 60-40.
Yeah.
And but there's plenty of people she talks to who are like, that sounds like lunacy to me. So it's not as if there's any sort of reasonable consensus in the scientific community about any of this.
Yeah, I honestly, and Chrissy kind of mentioned this before, I think when listening to this, I got a lot of I don't know, this is what I kind of think. And like, yes, they do talk about like, it's all in the math, like just trust the math. And I thought I liked math until I listened to this. I'm like, I don't think I like math anymore. Cause it really does get very complex. But a lot of this just genuinely confused the shit out of me even more. You know what I mean? Like there's so many, um, there, like opinions, I guess would be a good way to put it. And I believe them and that all makes sense. But then I look back and I'm like, but couldn't it be this other way? So like, I don't know, to be 100% honest. And like Kilian, you mentioned like you're more towards the universal consciousness, and it makes sense to me, to be 100% honest. But I just have so many questions, and I don't even think I would know where to start, where I would want to be answered first. You know what I mean? And I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
drives me the most insane about all of this is I just have questions on repeat.
Do either of you have any intuition? I know, like we all listen to Lights On, which leans one way, but do you have an intuition as to what you either want to believe or what you feel like makes the most sense?
Go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, I was already this way before I read Lights On. Was I had this experience where I truly believed in the universal consciousness, and honestly, it came from an experience with my dog. We had to have our dog put down earlier this year. He was 14, and like we were in that time frame where we had it scheduled. So there's like a couple days where I have to do this thing. I have to do this thing that I'm dreading. It's going to be terrible. And, I really started this like meditation journey over a year ago. And like I've been getting more and more involved with it. And, through meditation, you're mostly focusing on, realizing that you're having these thoughts and that you're not your thoughts. And not that you're dismissing these thoughts, but it's, oh, that's a thought. And then you just move on. You don't get stuck on those thoughts really. And as humans, we create a lot of suffering thinking too much in the past or the present. And like if you look at a dog, like dogs, they purely live in the moment. And through this situation, like I was thinking about my dog, and as I was like trying to live in the moment, because anytime I thought about the future of what was going to happen, like I created all the suffering. But in the moment, I just wanted to be with him, be grateful that he was there now. And I thought a lot about it. Like, why is it that when you're with your dog and your dog, like, I think we've all had this feeling. I think we're all dog people, but like your dog looks into your eyes and like you feel like your dog can see like into your soul, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I have this bond with this animal that I've never like like I don't know. It's to me, it's like such a weird experience because like we like dogs are, I think it's because they're just so present in the moment that they don't have all this stuff going on in their brain, and almost like their filter is, it's not clogged up like ours are as humans. And so they live in the moment. And I think that universal consciousness, like I'm experiencing a similar consciousness to my dog, and that connects us in a way. And a dog, like you feel that with a dog because his brain's not clouded by all these thoughts that we have as humans. And like when I say that out loud, to me, it's like, that sounds a little bit crazy. But that's like something that I felt. And when I came across that during that experience, I was like, I'm typically like a pretty scientific, like data driven person, but like, I was like, I feel that, like to me, that was different, And so that's why I was already leaning that way. So I feel like I had a heavy bias towards that. But I do like the whole quantum physics side of, what they're trying to express with this too. But I would say, to me, universal consciousness feels right. And the way that I look at that is it's like if you think about an ocean and, each consciousness is a wave in that ocean, and collectively we make up a universal consciousness. Like I love that analogy of it all.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I've had that same experience with my dog. He's also getting old. And so I've had many thoughts that have interrupted the present moment in a negative way. And my wife is fond of saying, don't mourn them twice. And that's become a mantra for me in terms of just like looking at him, sometimes getting sad about the future and just being like, this is pointless. Like, what am I doing? And I do think in some ways this, I'm not even sure that this conversation, this question is answerable in a sense. Like, I do think that if we just had all the science, all the math, like it would be answerable. But I don't know that we're capable of getting to that point. And so there's a significant sort of preference in for me for universal consciousness just because I find it so beautiful. Like it's beautiful and terrifying. And I wrote a Substack a little while ago called The Cannibal and the Collective, talking about this. Because if you take this idea at face value, then the universe is just constantly eating itself. It's like, you being in love with the dog, with another human being, is a version of the universe like giving itself a metaphysical and sometimes literal hug. But then you just have to recognize that war exists, and crime, and like what we might call evil, even if that's truly just like broken people acting out. And it is this like overall sort of terrifying picture, which is why I think your analogy of the ocean is really good for that, because the ocean, the mountains exemplify the idea of like beauty and terror being, this kind of conjoined force wherein we have absolutely no control. And I think like when I've been thinking about this topic on runs, and I've been in a forest, it has made me feel so connected to what's happening around me. Like there's this strange field of experience that I'm just like wandering through, and I'm like doing it with the trees, as opposed to feeling like it's me going through the trees. It's like we're all kind of doing the thing together. And that is a really powerful feeling. And I think meditation, there's some shortcuts you can take to get to that mindset for sure. But ultimately, if you're like really meditating and you have those like moments of bliss, the bliss is when yourself disappears. Like that's, there's this whole, there's a short book called On Having No Head. And like the cover photo is like someone sitting in like a classic meditation pose with like stars flowing out of their neck with no head. And that is kind of what it feels like when you reach the point of meditation where you're like, oh, okay, I'm able to be detached from my thoughts and like this conveyor belt of experience that we're normally having, and connect to what's beyond that. And I do think describing the brain as a filter of sorts sort of makes this all a little bit easier to understand, because if you were sitting there doing that back in the day and then a leopard happened upon you, like that leopard's just going to eat you. And so our brains, I don't think, are actually oriented towards like finding the ground truth of all of this, especially given the fact that, as we already talked about, it's like we can't actually access the moment. We're always living behind it.
One of the things that I'll say is interesting, and you kind of hit on that, was, like you might think of consciousness as like that sense of self, like I'm an I, there is a me, there's an ego there. And I think that's why it's such a great tie-in to thinking about free will, because I kind of like threw this topic out at a couple people who I also asked about free will, as well. And it seems like the people that struggled with like a thought of universal consciousness also struggled with the thought of there being no free will. And it seems like they're so caught up in that sense of self. And I definitely relate to that experience of like being in the woods and you feel so connected to everything around you. And I love that. And I've always felt that, like since day one of, doing endurance sports in the woods. It's just, I feel like these filters, like it strips away some of that from you. And as ultra runners, especially when we're out there doing crazy things, like in the middle of the night in the woods, like you strip down so many of those filters that you can much easily feel that connection to everything around you. And I think that's, like so beautiful in a way, for sure.
Oh yeah. And to go off of what Christie is saying with the sense of running, like I know we all kind of talk, and I'm sure everyone listening has heard like the flow state, being in the flow state and running. And like that is to me my deepest sense of meditation. Like I don't meditate on a regular. I think I know both of you do. And maybe I do need to do a little bit more, because I would probably experience it, or like I should do it is what I'm going to say. But when I'm running, like I think I'm striving to get in that flow state where I'm just out there experiencing, because like I do enjoy when I'm out there and like I'm not all consumed with whatever is narrating in my head and all the crazy bullcrap that I'm dealing with and like pity me, but just when I'm out there And, you know, an hour goes by and I'm not stressing, I'm not doing anything. I'm literally just in the woods. And like you guys mentioned, like experiencing, or not experiencing, I guess that's not, just literally connecting with everything. And I am with the trees and with the, you know, I'm here in the swamps with some palm trees and, you know, a whole bunch of mud and stuff. But it's just an experience that you can't really explain. And hearing you guys talk about it, I'm like, oh, they're the same way. Like, it's just so, like, as a runner, I think we understand it because we go through it, which if we do, we should understand consciousness a little bit more. You know, like universal consciousness, like we have this thing in our head that we're literally talking to ourselves, contradicting everything, making things way worse than it needs to be, or it's all about me, me, me. We don't really think about other people when we're having these conversations. If we do, it's usually negative towards ourselves in some weird aspect. So like just being in that flow state in a run, I think has changed so much for me. And I think genuinely that's why half of my addiction to running has happened, is because like I'm always looking for that peace. I'm always looking for that like quietness in my head.
Yeah, I think obviously you can't use anecdotal personal evidence to make particularly large claims about the world. But like with the free will discussion, first of all, it's funny to bring this up when people don't expect it and they're just like, what are you talking about? So I hope that you both, like Christie, it sounds like you've had that experience where people are just like, yeah, I'm not getting what you're putting out there. But I've like run into people in the wild before who have believed the same thing, and then there's always like an immediate like, whoa, wow, okay, let's talk about this for a little bit, because it's just so rare to meet people who have really thought about this. But I do think talking about the flow state, like it's an interesting phenomenological fact that a flow state is what we think of as particularly positive. What I think a lot of people, even if you're not runners, even if you're just in your daily life, even if you're not athletic, pursuing something physical, I think, you know, you could be losing yourself in your work, painting or writing, or if you have a job that you really love, you know, and a flow state is a positive experience that results from a diminishing of ego and self-regard. So there is something to me that seems like, since that feels so universal, that maybe it is getting at some ground truth there, and that it is this way to access what we're calling universal consciousness in everyday life. Or I find it often quite difficult to get into flow states, and so it's like when it happens, it's just really pleasant and sometimes surprising. But there is something there that I think just points toward, at the very least, the possibility that the ground truth is that ultimate connectivity. Because why else would the stripping of self be so positive? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I have a question. Christy, how much do you meditate? Do you meditate on a regular basis?
I do it every day.
Okay. Kilian, you're the same, right?
Me too.
So my question first, Chrissy, do you have a hard time finding the flow state when you're out running or doing something, you know what I mean? Like for us, we're runners, so I'm going to use running as an example. But do you feel like it is hard for you to get in that state of mind, like in that flow state?
Sometimes it can be, but I think that a lot of times I have to work harder to get there. And for me, like what that typically looks like is just kind of like you're spending so much time while you're running thinking about running.
Mm.
And so I try to like simply think that I am running, you know, like I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just like a way to not focus so much on exactly what I'm doing, but just try to simply think about it like at a more broader perspective, I guess. I don't know if that made sense.
No, yeah.
No,
And
that makes sense.
sorry, Kilian, you were kind of saying you struggle to find it as well?
Yeah, I think what's paradoxical about the flow state is that trying to find it makes it harder to
Yeah.
find it. So everyone who meditates will kind of talk about the idea that when they arrive someplace that is extremely pleasant and or rewarding, however you want to phrase it, mentally, what ultimately is happening there is like a letting go as opposed to a grasping. It's like you can't actually reach the thing by trying to get there. It's like this weird idea that giving up any sort of goal oriented practice is actually more likely to get you to what your goal is. and that doesn't really compute that well for me, because I'm such a goal oriented person in like all of my life. So meditation to me is I typically find reasonably difficult, and I do find it often quite difficult to get into a flow state even with running. But the moments that I do, it's like one of the kind of practical techniques that I'll try when I'm running is like, when you're meditating, typically if you're doing like a Vipassana mindfulness practice, you're like focusing on your breath. When I'm running, I'll try to focus on the sound of my feet.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the thing that if I can really dial into that specific experience, that typically will usher in the flow state easier than anything else for me. And again, it's like this weird letting go / paying attention to this. So it's this is like anomalous experience that's hard to describe, like you said, and very difficult to like force. It's not going to happen if you're like trying really hard. You can't grip a flow state like that. But the sound of my feet is really the thing that typically does it for me. And if I can, I live in the desert, so it's like a lot of sand and slick rock. And so if I can like hear those noises as opposed to existing with those noises, that makes a big difference for me.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christie.
I was gonna say, I think like that's one of the reasons why like I like to meditate every day, is because it lets me practice observing those thoughts, and so that when I am running, like that becomes more natural to me. Because like when you hear like Kilian say that about like just existing with those things, it's like, well, how do you get there? And I think that's the bridge, is that the meditation is the practice that helps you along the way.
Yeah, there's a reason that it's called a meditation practice, and it's because unless you've spent 3 years in a cave like the Buddha, it's unlikely that you're ever going to master your own mind. And so it's this constant like, okay, I have to learn again how to do this every single day, basically. And honestly, like I kind of hate meditating. Like when I'm about to sit down to meditate, I have all of the thoughts of like, I could literally be doing anything else. Like it seems like a waste of time. Most often for the 10 to 20 minutes, I've been meditating 30 minutes a day for the past 52 days because it was part of 75 hard. And but most of the time I'm not like super frustrated while I'm doing it. But it's like getting myself to do it is actually kind of difficult.
Yeah. And that's the whole reason, well, more or less, the reason I was asking is because I'm wondering, like, if you guys, in a sense, have an upper hand. You know what I mean? Because, like, you're practicing meditation. I do not practice meditation. But I feel like, in a sense, like, Kilian, you mentioned your feet. Like, you're always trying to listen to your feet. I'm the same way. Or I really try to listen to, like, what's around me. So, like, I'll really focus on, like, not doing, whatever. And it could be like the weirdest thing, like listening to my feet touch the ground is one thing that I've really learned to do. And then also like if I'm in a good trail out in Florida, like I'm always listening to what's around me because I'm like low-key trying to hear something. And that sounds like crazy, but it really just makes me get out of my own head in that aspect. But I feel like, you guys mentioned like it's just not easy. You know what I mean? Like I low-key end of goal is always to be at flow state or get in flow state just because I thoroughly enjoy it. But the odds of me getting into it I would say even once a month, it's very rare. You know what I mean? But also I'm not out in the middle of the forest. Majority of the time I'm on the treadmill, which is way different. But it's just like this weird thing that us as runners, I think we do all experience, but we don't realize what we're doing. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I wanted to bring up the flow state with running, because people can relate, I think, with the universal consciousness and this flow state phenomenon that is going around with ultra running, is because it's connected. You know what I mean? It's kind of the same, maybe different in who you ask, but it is this sense of like not being or existing instead of experiencing, not literally being there like, oh, this is going on to me, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, you're just literally running through the forest or the desert or whatever the case may be and existing instead of experiencing all the things that are happening to you.
Perfectly put.
But let's get into there's a huge topic I want to talk about with the universal consciousness. And I haven't said this to anyone. So the topic that I would like to talk about is like the plants, the trees. They talk about the trees. This shit blew my mind.
It's my favorite episode.
I'm not going to butcher it. I'm going to make Kilian talk about it because we all know Kilian. Like, you can explain this a lot better than I can. But genuinely, when I heard this, I stopped because I was out walking my dogs, and I'm like looking around, like what, like looking at my feet, like what the heck. So Kilian, tell us about the trees and everything with that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so my favorite, audiobook is like episodic. It's kind of like a series of podcasts more than it is really an audiobook. But in my favorite episode, Plants and Parasites, they discuss the evidence that trees in a forest communicate with genetic relatives via their root systems. So they call the like OG trees mother trees. And they've basically discovered that mother trees can send nutrients and information to their saplings that are in the area through the root systems. So they can send nutrients, like you can witness packets, is what they call it, of carbon being passed from mother tree to their offspring, essentially. And so the mother tree is helping the offspring survive. More amazing to me is that when a mother tree in an area dies, they send something else, something other than carbon, but a packet of information to their saplings in the area. The theory is that they send some sort of signal that sort of explains to this tree like how the mother tree died, and potentially like how to avoid this same scenario. And that results in these sapling trees having a much greater rate of survival than other trees in the same area. So when there'll be probably be someone listening to this who I've told this to, or I've been like, the trees are talking to each other, which that's just like, that is what's happening underneath the surface. This totally blew my mind. Like, and this is another thing that has made me so excited when I've been running through forests, is just kind of like looking around at all these. I've like started to think of trees as beings instead of just like trees, and I'm like, all these beings, they're talking to each other. Like, I've got an elm tree in my backyard, and it's probably communicating somehow with the tree in my neighbor's yard. Like they're connected in the root system, because the root system is as big as the canopy, if not bigger. And so yeah, it's like the complexity of plants is much greater than we would have thought. Another fact that amazed me is that if you anesthetize a Venus flytrap with the exact same type of anesthesia that we use to put people under during surgery, like that Venus flytrap can't close, and can't close its mouth or whatever it's called, where it's eating the fly. And so like that same biological system works on the plant's primitive version of consciousness, potentially, or just the synapses, like who knows. But all of that, it's like when you hear those kinds of facts and think about them, like, man, it adds a layer of complexity to everything that's going on around you that really isn't apparent to you if you're just like looking and seeing the trees as just like objects.
Yeah. I will say I've never thought like, oh, these trees are communicating to each other. I have lived, worked outside, like it never came to mind. You know what I mean? Like, a tree is a tree. It's just standing there. It's an object. It's there, and then hearing this, I literally could not stop thinking about like, I wonder if I were, or if, not me, but like if the tree were to experience, I don't even know, like I live here in Florida, hurricanes happen, like if something's going down and it's raining in this section really bad, or maybe it's flooded here, but it's not flooded somewhere else. Like, is that mother tree helping this one, or is this other tree helping this? Like, I have so many questions, and like, I used to work at a golf course, and we'd have like half of the golf course go down because of flooding, and, like it would uproot. And now I'm like, did it know it was coming? Could it tell that the soil was getting that wet, that it was shifting one direction, and then eventually it was just going to fall out, or, like come out of the ground in some aspect? And I have so many questions now, and it's just this crazy thing that I never thought I would think about. Like, trees communicate with each other. What?
It makes my life so much better.
Yeah.
But I do think like it's one of those things that when you look at trees in a particular state of mind, it seems really obvious.
Honestly, like, ever since I've listened to this, I would agree 100%. The list before this, like listening to Lights On, no. Like, I would have been like, dude, you're insane. You know, like, this makes no sense. There's no way trees communicate with each other. And maybe I should say that was before I even listened to like free will. Like, I've always thought about things, but I don't think ever to the extent until I started listening to stuff like this. So now I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. Like, I believe it. I genuinely believe trees communicate with each other. And I think so many more things do that we have no clue about, you know?
Do you ever wonder about the impression that you are having on the like dirt and rocks and stones? Like not, I don't think that they have feelings in the sense that we would recognize them if universal consciousness is true. But I do wonder about all of these, like I've often looked at saguaro cacti in Arizona because they can be like 300 inches tall. They grow about an inch a year. So they're 300 years old. You know, they're older than the United States. And I've been like, if I could question that cactus, like what could it tell me about the world? You know, like what has this cactus seen? And now I think that about boulders. And I'm like, I live around a bunch of sandstone with big, huge cliffs. And, you know, they're slowly eroding over time. And one of the things I love about the desert is that you're just like wandering through every possible eon of the evolution of these types of rocks, because you're running on the sand, you're looking at the cliffs, and then there's everything in between those two, and they're all made of the same stuff. And now I think that about like, what would this boulder have to say? Because this like geological time is just a completely different scale than anything biological. And so it like the separation between, you know, those two things, like inanimate and animate, has totally been muddled for me. And like it just makes me curious about like the conversations that might be possible if we could really tap into this experience.
Yeah, so I have a question on this. So I'm going to push this topic, I think, a little bit. So with trees, I can understand because I think they're all rooted, right? So they have a connection in my mind all through the roots. When you say with rocks, are you insinuating they're talking to one another or they have their own aspect? Does that make sense? I don't want to say feelings because it's not feelings, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know that they're talking to one another. I don't know that there's any kind of institutional memory in the cliffs around us and stuff like that. But it opens the door to that question, right? Like I probably think, you know, I think that if you were to be transplanted into the consciousness of a tree, I think it would be completely unrecognizable to what we're currently experiencing right now. You know, it's like not only are their cells structured differently in that they have cell walls and different kind of membranes and structures in there, but like the way they reproduce is like could a tree have a sexual experience? You know, it's like it's reproducing with itself often. You know, it has like both the pieces to make new trees. So it's like, what would that be like? Total open-ended question there. But I think the same question is at least applicable to everything that seems inanimate. Like trees, I think, seem remarkably animate for how stationary they are, right? Like they at least go through the process of losing leaves, creating new ones, growing in different directions. Like the rocks aren't doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think if we're willing to grant the universal consciousness theory up front, it's like you have to then be like, well, what's the experience there? And my inclination is that it's probably a really low level. Like maybe it is just like there's like a baseline level of awareness that goes all the way down to an electron. But who knows? You know, it's like if you think about something like quantum computing, which is like using the atom to speed up how we process information, you know, maybe there is some level of information processing going on throughout the world. And so I just think that there is the possibility of tapping into something so much bigger than us that like I hope if that happens, you know, I'm alive to see it because I want some answers to these questions.
Yeah. It is definitely like it is something I wish we would have the answers to. To be honest, I don't think in our lifetime there will be.
No.
And I don't know honestly if the one thing, I don't think it talks too much about this, but I did like a bunch of research and it talks about like AI helping in this aspect of like, or, technology helping, but I still just don't know. Like, I'm a science person. Like, I went to school for science, nothing like this shit. But, like, I just don't know if we will have anything to ever give us like the actual proof or data. But I hope there is.
Has this conversation or thinking about this like collapsed the boundaries between what is artificial and natural at all for you? Like, I've always sort of been like, we call aspartame like an artificial sweetener, but it's not like we got it from aliens. Like, we got it from the planet, So it just, and like, we think of cities as artificial creations, but the same thing. It's like, we are part of the planet, and so cities are ultimately natural, because we built them, And I think this particular conversation makes those boundaries seem like completely useless.
I agree to that. Yeah, it's this weird thing, like, in today's age and how more advanced we are in this world. Like, I think in 100 years people are going to look back and call stuff that we call artificial not, because it's not in some aspect, in my opinion. Christie, you've been quiet. What do you got?
Like, I don't know. When you start talking about like rocks having consciousness, I'm like, that sounds even crazier. But then when I think about, like, here I am like saying, yeah, I think my dog has, consciousness and we're connected because it's universal and all this good stuff. And then I can't really dismiss that a rock doesn't have some level of consciousness. So I really like that, thinking of there's, different levels to consciousness, and like, we're not talking about like it has a brain so it must be conscious. Like, I think you can, that's, part of the debate is it, the brain that's creating the consciousness. But I think if, like, when you look at plants, like, plants are such a good example. I do think they're doing something, that's for sure. And maybe rocks aren't, and it's just because they have either a different or a lower level of consciousness. But plants, they're a little bit smarter than rocks, apparently. But yeah, I don't know, like, it's such a crazy topic. But I'll tell you what I really want to talk about now, if we're done talking about plants, is the quantum physics side of things, because to me, so like, the plants was my least favorite part, the quantum physics was my favorite. And I just love like thinking like the slit experiment with, that's such a cool, like, that and then like Schrodinger's cat, like, just like,
yeah.
And then you can start thinking about like the whole multiverse, and there being like multiple versions of ourselves, and is every experience being played out on a different universe somewhere. That really hurts my brain when I start to think about that.
Do you want to explain the two slit experiment, or do you want me to do that?
You go ahead. You're crushing it.
So the two slit experiment. First of all, the two slit experiment sounds dirty. Like, the name is like not. Every time I hear it, I'm like, But anyway, basically, they would fire one proton of light through two different slits in like a board, and if the proton was a wave, it would make a wave pattern on the other side of the slit, which a wave pattern is going to look like if you splashed water on your wall. If it was behaving like a particle, it would make like a dot, basically, as opposed to a wave pattern. So splash versus like a purposeful, like little paintbrush, boom, there's a particle. And what they discovered was that if you are firing the light through two slits, and you observe the particle, it actually behaves as like both things at the same time. Whereas if you are not observing it, it will be one of them. And so this brought about what's called the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, whereas it's like everything is created by our perception. I don't think that is the one that is prescribed to by most scientists, but it is out there. But it also, you mentioned the multiverse. Basically, the idea with that is that potentially the act of observation is actually like splitting the probability. of the particles. And so like this could be happening 100% of the time. And so the idea would be like, there's a universe in which we're having this same conversation, but we're speaking German. There's a universe where we're having this same conversation, but like my head explodes and spontaneously combusts on camera. And so like all of the possibilities are happening because the universe is infinite. And so it like the probabilities are splitting along each path as we're going through time. That is, and we don't even have to get into this because this is part of it that I really struggled to grasp. But that is if time is fundamental, which maybe it's not. But that is about as good as I can do, I think, to explain the two slit experiment and kind of like what I think they call like the there's a quantum indeterminacy, and each particle has a wave function that it like determines where it can be and like the probability of if it's in one or another place at any given time. And so what collapses the wave function is action. And so the only way to know where something is, like what's going to happen, is to actually like go through the time process of doing it. And so that all is totally baffling to me. Like I don't really get how things can be in two places at one time. And I don't really understand how like you can have entangled particles. And so if you do something to, you know, an atom that's entangled with another atom on opposite sides of the world, like they're going to happen at the exact same time, regardless of the space between them. So there's a whole bunch of quantum facts that I just find completely baffling, but are underlie this whole conversation and make me like, one of the reasons I think intellectually I'm just like open to universal consciousness is that all of the underlying quantum facts are so strange and counterintuitive that why not embrace the fun theory? How was that? Did I sound reasonably smart?
Yeah. But Christie, I'm gonna let you kind of take this section because I know you probably have questions and or a top like subjects to talk about.
I mean, I think Kilian like really nailed it. To me, like the crazy part of it was when you start thinking about if something exists only because you've perceived it, and then you start thinking about what is your reality. Like that's where I kind of like set back and just had to think about things. And it's like I don't even need to see any kind of math for this because I wouldn't even understand the math anyways, you know.
Totally.
But it's just like think like you hit on it where, you know, space, you know, they talk about space time a lot, and is space time actually fundamental or not? And it may get proven in the future as not, and it might just be kind of like a stage where reality happens, but rather it's like a lens that we're perceiving reality. And so this whole thing kind of just made me like set back and think like perceiving our reality is like I'm questioning the whole thing now, because like if we exist in infinite universes, then it's like, is reality real? You know, like, is anything real? Is life real? Is this computer screen real? Like, is it only real because I've perceived it now? You know, I've viewed it. And I don't know, like, you can really just like set back and start thinking about some of the stuff, and it just blows your mind, I feel like.
Does it make you feel better about death?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think to me, universal consciousness actually makes me feel better about death, because I have this belief that potentially my consciousness goes back into the universe when I die. And then it, you know, we're just all connected. And I don't know if like that's part of reincarnation. I haven't thought about that too much yet, but I think that makes me feel better about death. But I don't know about maybe if I die on this world, like, does it make me feel better that maybe in another universe I'm still alive? I don't think so.
No, I think I don't necessarily believe in like any idea that like whatever I'm calling me is like reconstituted in any form, whether, you know, reincarnation or just like atomically or whatever. But it does make me feel better, like talking about our dogs, you know, like when I sometimes like get into the thought process of imagining like what is inevitable in the future here, I just it does make me feel a little bit better to think that it's like, you know, with the ocean analogy, it's sort of like all of our lives are different sizes of like glasses of water that we're taking out of the ocean, and then death is just getting like poured back into the ocean instead of, you know, separated from it entirely. And there's something about that does bring me some level of comfort, because like outside of a religious context, like the problem of death, like death is scary, you know, like not necessarily for me, like I've never really feared like actually dying for myself, but just like loved ones, dogs, all of those things. And I think like some level of comfort is like it's a return as opposed to a goodbye. Like that does add a layer of like potential meaning slash just you know, a connectedness that I think lacks in a lot of secular contexts.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the big reasons why I came to the universal consciousness, because I wanted to believe that when my dog died that his consciousness would return, and through like meditation and like being more connected to like an inner stillness, that eventually I would also return, as my consciousness would return. And, you know, we're part of the same consciousness. So, you know, like people say, you know, he'll always be with you. Like I almost kind of feel like, because if
Yeah.
consciousness is universal, then in a way he is, because we are part of the same. And so, like I said, that may be a little bit biased because of this very specific situation that I went through, but that it, to me, that's like the way that I feel it, you know, like I truly feel that. And so it's really hard for me to try to perceive it differently, because kind of like what you said, like we don't have any true science to like back up any of these theories to actually prove one of them to be true. And so I like going with the one that not necessarily makes me feel better, but like it's what I feel most connected to.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think that if you take all of it seriously, it's like it leads to those kind of conclusions. Like those conclusions aren't actually absurd, although they might sound fantastical on the face of it. One thing that I've thought a lot about in regards to the connectedness, it's like, so like what is love? You know, like it's like a very difficult physical and mental feeling and sensation to describe unless you've felt it, right? And I've thought about this in relation to both people and places. So like in relation to, you know, my wife Susie, I like we've talked about how, what if love is like this connectedness is because like your previous atoms were a part of the same star, or a part of the same river at some point, or something, like anything on the planet, because ultimately like all that is what we are. Like we are recycled atoms, right? Like that's the law of conservation of mass and energy and all of those things. Like we pretty much know that. And so maybe when you feel that like instantaneous connection with a person, whether it's like a friend or a spouse or whatever, it's like that could potentially be due to the fact that your atoms were once a part of the same structure, and it's like your consciousness is like finding each other once again. And like again, sort of sounds fantastical, but kind of a logical conclusion following from universal consciousness, which is why I think these like broad level philosophical discussions, you know, if I have this type of conversation with my brother, he's just like, what are we doing? Like, why are we talking about this? You know, I have a car to fix. And he's extremely practical, and I admire that about him. But I think like the way that these conversations actually relate to my daily life is they do just make me like, I think what our cultural context lacks in so many ways is like any ability or training to like be able to step back and appreciate the bigger picture. You know, what is a flow state? It's a lack of self. Like what is the appreciation for universal consciousness? It's the idea that the ego, the self, isn't the be all end all of our life, right? And so what I think religion used to do, and probably still does in a lot of cases for people, is allow you to sidestep the conveyor belt, you know, and you can get outside of it and appreciate that it's something bigger, whether you call it God, whether you call it nature, whether you call it the universe, whatever. And I think that that's what like this type of theory does for me, is it allows me to kind of sidestep the daily life and the sort of self-imposed stress that we've talked a lot about from thoughts, and just recognize like, wow, there is something much bigger going on here than I can grasp in my hands. Like I can't touch it, I can't understand it. When I learn something about it, all it does is show me how much I don't know. But that it gives me this like sense of wonder, like staring up at a night sky full of stars. You know, it's that feeling, but writ large and infinite, because that's where we are. And I think like that realization is really beautiful in and of itself.
I agree. And I'll say the only thing, well, not the only thing, I took a lot out of that, but right now all I can think about is like, so you're telling me all of us were either like connected in some aspect in a river or on a, consciously we were connected because we're all BFFs right now. So maybe that's what like all the ultra runners are, is we were all connected in some weird way and now we all love each other because we're like back to normal.
Yeah, maybe like our atoms used to be caribou or something, like some sort of species that migrated long distances, and that's why we feel like we need to go run through the middle of the night to feel like ourselves. I don't know, but it is just, it seems plausible, and it seems like if it's not plausible, it's poetic enough that it's like a metaphorical truth to me.
Hmm. Yeah. And like hearing you talk about it, I'm like, it makes complete sense. Like if I can take out, you know, black and white, you know what I mean? Because nothing in the world is black and white, even though I would love to think it is. But it genuinely makes sense in why some people get along really, really well, and then other people don't get along at all. You know what I mean? And then it it just has me questioning a lot more, like always. So thank you for that, Kilian. But is there anything that you guys want to talk about? Any specific topic left?
Christie, you got anything?
I don't think so.
I think to connect this again, like back to just the practical in a sense, it's like if I think a lot of people feel a sense of like cultural and societal malaise in relation to the creation of meaning, and I think recognizing the infinite nature of the universe, the fact that we're on a rock hurtling through a void that we don't understand the physics of, and nobody does, even people who are smarter than us, like all of that can seem really scary. And I think like when I was in college, I certainly knew people who took these kinds of ideas and went to darker places with them, and then like at the extreme end, just like becoming a nihilist. Like life is meaningless, so I'm just going to treat myself like garbage and whatever. And I'm not going to pursue passions. I'm not going to have passions. And there was something about that at a certain point in life that was like sort of cool and attractive. But I just think that the logical conclusion from the nothing matters, the bigness of everything, the potential for universal consciousness, is not that we are all floating aimlessly in this ocean. It's that you get to be here for the ride. Like you get to pick the direction of you get to try to sail through the winds of the chaos and navigate the waves. And like that's the thing to be grateful for. And it might not be the easiest A to B if you're coming from different contexts to make that conclusion, but that conclusion to me has made my life so much better. Instead of being like the stranger in Camus' novel, it's like you want to be earnest and you want to be like striving for things, and none of this takes away from that. I think like Christie started the conversation with gratitude. I think ultimately what recognizing the vastness of the surface area of our ignorance does is make you grateful for the fact that you get to be here to ponder it at all.
I couldn't agree more. And that's like you mentioned, I didn't even really think about it in the sense of like going from a point where you take what we're talking about and being like, well, nothing matters, so I'm going to do nothing. Like, that sounds really horrible, but I haven't even really thought about that. I know people do that, like you mentioned, and I'm sure it is a thing that I do not really care to dig into, but it is sad to know that people do that. But it also just shows what type of people there are out there too. Like we haven't talked about that. That's like not what we're trying to say. Like we're trying to kind of understand this more, but we're still out here living our lives, doing hard things. We all have jobs, we all do things, and it's not like we're just like, oh, I'm going to be a bum on the log and just nothing really matters and life will guide me in a way. Like we're putting in action and we might not have 100% the free will to do it, but we think we do sometimes. So it's just that weird dynamic of there can truly be such differences in the way people listen and read and understand things. But I think the way we have and the way we are doing it is, I'm going to say it the right way to do
it. Agreed. And I everyone should go, like, we're only scratching the surface of this topic here. Like, if this interests you, go listen to Lights On, because I think it's fantastic. Like, I've listened to it multiple times now, and like Christie said too, you do have to really pay attention to it because the ideas are pretty complex, but it's accessible in a way that not a lot of quantum mechanical things are. So if this has sparked an interest, it's worth a purchase.
Yeah. And I will say, like, when I listen to this, I would listen to like a section at a time and then have to think about it for like 24 hours. And then I would go back to it because I was like, oh, wait, hold on. And then sometimes I'd have to go back and re-listen to it because I'm like, did I hear that right? Like it really does make you think, but in a good way. And I feel like anyone that's listening to this, they want to think that way and just understand a little bit more. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. If you got this far, you're likely to be interested.
If anyone is this far and they aren't interested, like, that's just insane, to be 100% honest.
Yeah. If you made it past the first 10 minutes when we sounded like high college students, then you're solid.
Yes, so true, so true. So my next question for you, Kilian, obviously we did, free will, universal consciousness. What's next? What do you want to talk about next? Because obviously we have to keep this going.
Yeah, I mean, we could do something, we could shift from the kind of metaphysical to something a little more practical that we both know a lot about. We could go for the Stoics. We could talk about meditations or Seneca or something like that, because that, I think, is much more of a straight line relatable to sort of ultra running and our typical topics. But I mean, I do think we should keep this going. We should do a once a month philosophy hour because it's fun. And I like, there's not a lot of people I know who are interested in all of this. So I really appreciate you both. And I like originally doing the free will discussion and now doing, universal consciousness and being willing to potentially sound insane to some people.
Well, at least you're insane with insane people, and we have insane people listening. So it all works out. But yeah, I think we will chat off the mic and try to find what's next. And then we'll try to do this once a month, and just keep it going.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you both for being on the podcast, and I will chat with you guys soon.